I want to welcome everyone here today. We have serious news to announce to the people of our state. This morning I took action to implement our budget. A budget, as I said many times, is not a one-day document. It's really 365 days a year, and we have to manage our budget. So we clearly do not have enough money in the budget that was appropriated by the legislature in the spring to pay the personnel and the facility costs of a number of our facilities and people who work for the state of Illinois. So we've taken steps today to close a number of state facilities. This is not an overnight process. There's a legal process, an orderly process that allows us to present what we intend to do and then have a review by a commission of the General Assembly for their input and oversight. This takes several months, but it has to begin today. And I've already ordered that to happen. It will result in over 1,900 state employees who will be laid off from their jobs. Most of these layoffs are in conjunction with the closing of the 7 state facilities, which are Tinley Park Mental Health Center, Singer Mental Health Center, which is located in Rockford, Chester Mental Health Center in Randolph County, Jacksonville Developmental Center, Mabley Developmental Center in Dixon, Logan Correctional Center located in Lincoln, and Murfreesboro Youth Correctional Center in Southern Illinois. Now, as I said, this is a day-to-day process. Managing a budget is something you have to do on a daily basis. You can't spend money that you do not have. It is not appropriated by the General Assembly. So earlier this year, in order to manage this budget in this fiscal year that began on July 1st, I had to make the decision that we canceled pay raises for state employees, 30,000 state employees. That was phase 1. Today, the announcing of the closure and the layoffs is phase 2 of implementing a budget that was passed by the members of the General Assembly by a constitutional majority. In previous years, the last 2, the General Assembly decided to have what's called a lump sum budget. They basically did not want to make any cuts. They told me several times that you, the governor, should make all the cuts. They didn't want to have their fingerprints on any cuts. So, clearly before an election, that's what they said. So I had to do that in the 2 previous fiscal years. This year, the General Assembly decided to do it a different way. They wanted to do what's called a line item budget, meaning that each item in the budget is approved by both houses of the General Assembly and sent to the governor. What that means is the governor does not have the authority to raise any of those line items. I can't switch money from one department to the next in order to make up a shortfall or an inadequacy or an insufficiency. In the previous 2 years, we were able to do that. Not in this fiscal year. The General Assembly, by law, has a line item budget. They've lined it out for each and every department, and clearly it's insufficient in several major departments of our state in order to maintain existing facilities and existing personnel. So we have to take the action that we're taking today. I have earlier in this fiscal year reduced the line items in the General Assembly budget. They, I think, appropriated about $33.2 billion. That's what they appropriated. I reduced that by $376 million in vetoes that were done on June 30th of this year for this coming fiscal year that we're in now. That's $376 million that I vetoed out of the spending plan that they enacted, roughly a $33.2 billion plan. This is important because that money, in my judgment, should be and can be reallocated to help deal with some of the issues that we're talking about today, the layoffs and the facility closures. But the General Assembly has to sustain my vetoes, and that they'll begin to take action on that late next month. I can't wait till late next month. I have to act today on behalf of the people of Illinois to maintain the core functions of each of our departments in state government, the core functions that they carry out with respect to mental health, developmental disabilities, corrections, making sure that our citizens are not discriminated against. We have a Department of Human Rights in our state that had its budget cut by over 40%. Literally dozens of employees. These are the men and women who hear complaints of discrimination in housing and employment and so on. That particular agency is particularly handicapped by the appropriation adopted by the General Assembly. Indeed, the appropriation of the General Assembly also handicaps the agency that oversees the utilities in Illinois, the Illinois Commerce Commission. They adopted, as I said, a line item budget, department by department, and then within departments, specific dollar amounts for facilities, for personnel, and for all the other things. And by law, by our Constitution, the governor cannot go in and raise those appropriations. What we have to do is do what I did in terms of line item vetoing certain spending that I believe can be reallocated to help mitigate some of the matters that we're talking about right now with respect to facilities and layoffs. I think it is important that we manage the budget enacted by the General Assembly, their appropriations. We do this in the most responsible manner possible. Decisions made by members of the General Assembly I may or may not agree with, but once they have adopted their budget, it is now the law of our state. We have to implement this in a responsible manner. And that's what I'm doing today. I can't wait till sometime in the future and hope that some other money comes from reallocation or from the federal government or anywhere else. We have to make sure that we have in important departments like mental health and developmental disabilities and corrections and employment, human rights and fighting discrimination. We have to have enough money to carry out the core functions of each of those departments for the whole fiscal year. We can't run out of money in April, May, or June for the entire department. That wouldn't be responsible, and it wouldn't really carry out what the will of the people of our state is. So these are very serious actions today, and this is phase two. Now, I would say to our colleagues in the General Assembly that when they come together again next month, they have to look at the vetoes of $376 million of spending that I have made in their plan. This is their plan. They want to spend $33.2 billion. I've accepted that, but I've also reduced it by $376 million. And I think that they should support my vetoes, uphold those vetoes, consider, if they wish, reallocating some of that $376 million to deal with the events that we're announcing today. Today's events result in about $313 million or so in cost, and $376 million could help mitigate some of those particular reductions if that's what the General Assembly wishes to do. I want to reiterate that previous years it was a line item. It was not a line item budget. It was a lump sum budget where the General Assembly basically said they did not want to partake in any way, shape, or form in cutting the budget. They wanted the governor to do that, and I did. Now, this year they wanted to cut the budget and do it themselves by a line item approach. Now, members of the General Assembly cannot run away from what they did in the spring. In the spring, they enacted, in some cases, draconian cuts in personnel line items for mental health, for developmental disabilities, for corrections in our prisons. They voted for it, they approved it, and some of them patted themselves on the back for it. Now today they can't say, well, when you have to reduce the number of mental health facilities in Illinois, and we are, when you have to reduce the number of developmental disability facilities in our state, and we are, and any other of the facilities as well, this is what the General Assembly budget required. They did not appropriate enough money to maintain the existing facilities we have or the existing state employees that we have. Now, I'm sympathetic to the opportunity, if we want to, in the best process of democracy, visit on this issue in the course of the next weeks as we head towards the veto session of the General Assembly. The whole purpose of that session is for members of the General Assembly to look back on their work in the spring and determine whether or not they have shortcomings, insufficiencies, things that need to be improved or reallocated. I want to emphasize the cutting and spending. That's been done. The budget was passed. It has a number of $33.2 billion, but within that budget there may be some reallocation opportunities that we can work together on. But I don't want to presume that will happen. I don't think that's a responsible thing to do. I think a governor has to take reality today. And I would say to our friends in the General Assembly, it's time for a rendezvous with reality. And if you vote for something in the spring, don't run away from it in the fall. If you want to change it, if you want to work together in the democratic process as we come together in the veto session, I look forward to doing that with anybody at any time. But I think it is important that we understand that we must make decisions today that are responsible so our state can have enough money to have sufficient corrections, sufficient mental health, sufficient developmental disabilities, that we do have an agency that oversees any kind of discrimination that might take place against citizens, and they have a remedy. They can go to the Department of Human Rights. Same way with our Department of Illinois Commerce Commission that oversees the utilities.